Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to game week. We've officially arrived to game week of the 2022 college football season. The Oregon Ducks obviously open up against the number 3 ranked Georgia Bulldogs, defending national champions, Dan Lanning's old stomping grounds. And to get ready for the week, we are bringing in the Monday mailbag back to its regular scheduled time. And a lot of questions are big picture or focused on Georgia specific.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun show. Fun to be in game week. We'll speak with Dan Lanning later this evening for those who maybe are expecting coverage. Just to give that, I know some people listen much later in the day, but if you are listening to this like right when it gets dropped this morning, typically there'd be a press conference. That is not the case this year. Dan's going to be speaking late evening around 6:45. So expect to see coverage from what he has to say around that time, just giving people a warning so they're not thinking we're sleeping on the job or something. So first question comes in from Pair Half. And by the way, this is the first time in a while we've taken a question from someone from the website. Usually we take it from Twitter, but Matt got a direct message on the site from somebody. I thought it was a good question to start the show with. So from Pair Half on Duck Territory, there's not really a question in here, but there's a lot of things to talk about. The way things ended last year for the football team, I understand the hesitancy of people regarding this year's team, but don't you think this year's team is set up to win? I mean, how many years in a row have they signed top classes? I was really sad to see Mario leave, but it wasn't like he won many games in the coaching box, more so with recruiting and cultural build. I can think of more games where a lack of adjustments. That cut off in our chat, so I have to go back.
I think it's bad game plans.
Well, the whole thing cut off way early in the chat. Bad game plans, questionable in-game calls, either made for close wins or dubious losses. With this team's past recruiting lineup and the experience gained with past year's injury coverage by younger players, if this year's coaching staff can do better adjusting to game situations and utilization on the personnel, this should be a top 10 team, in my opinion. It's a long question, might be a record for the longest, in part because usually these are Twitter questions, and I think that probably was like 2 or 3 tweets worth of characters from Pair Half. But I think I want to start here because, and we touched on this a little bit in the past, but the coaching element here and how much that can play an impact. And I don't want to spend time dissecting Mario Cristobal's time at Oregon because I find that to be kind of counterproductive. That's in the past. There's about to be a new season with a new coaching staff that starts in like 5 days. So I'd rather focus on the new staff. But I just think the role in Oregon's success this season from the coaching staff is something we so rarely talk about. We've spent so much time talking about players. We spent so much time talking about schemes, which obviously are coach related. We talk about injuries. We talk about, like he mentions here, like younger players and how much they can be involved. I think it's important, though, to talk about a young coaching staff in terms of the game in, game out situations. And my point to this would be Mario was, and again, I don't want to get too much into the weeds with Bash and Mario. Mario was not a great in-game coach. I think most people would admit that. And there were mistakes that did hurt Oregon. I don't know when to say cost them games, but probably cost them some games or hurt the opportunity to win some games. I just want to guard against the idea that Dan Lanning, who has no experience as a head coach, is going to step in and be a master in-game coach in terms of clock management, in terms of decision making, in terms of all those kind of things, because I think that's setting him up to become a punching bag potentially from the fan base who I think I'm already seeing it, just kind of like the expectation is he's going to be kick ass right away. And I want to remind people that doesn't really happen typically. It's pretty unique. You think back to Chip Kelly at Oregon over a decade ago. His first game against Boise State was a complete disaster. Was one of the most disappointing losses to start a season Oregon has had. They totally didn't show up. I don't think they had a first down in the first half. It ends with a player throwing a punch, and people at that point were like, "Oh my gosh, what is he doing? Did they make the wrong play?" It was the same thing where Kelly was a longtime coordinator, a very successful coordinator, really an innovative, kind of thinker, and it didn't work out in the first game. And then the season picked up, and it turned out really totally fine. Obviously, had the best 4-year run in school history. I think with Lanning, we have to be aware that he might take some ups and downs, as a head coach. This is his first time being the guy. And I think the question is getting towards a 10-win season and the possibility of that. I think that's totally plausible. Oregon has a really talented roster. I think they can win a lot of games, but I also just want to guard against the expectation being that Dan comes in and it's like hunky-dory, everything's perfect and everything's great. He's like a savant immediately. He's going to make mistakes. He even mentioned it in a scrimmage, the second one, that he made a mistake with a clock management decision at the end of a end of game situation rather than clocking a ball that kicked a field goal, blah, blah, blah. So long-winded way of me saying, like, I think there's a lot in this question from Prehm to consider in terms of like why things could be better. But one thing that I don't think is automatically better is that a first-year head coach is going to be significantly better than somebody who had, 6 to 7 years, maybe not as an elite or even a very good game management coach, but one who at least had head coaching experience in that regard.
Ditto, Erik. Ditto.
Sorry, I said a lot of words.
I think you're right on Mario Cristobal, and I think you're also right on everyone just needs to pump the brakes that Dan Lanning is going to be perfect. He might be, but he could have a lot of growing pains too as a head coach from a game management perspective. I think that also applies to offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham. This will be his first time running his own offensive system, his own idea of what the offense should look like in its entirety and have full control of that. I think Joe Lorig as a special teams coordinator has a lot of success previously at Penn State. There's less worry there about special teams for me. But you can go down the line for some of these coaches, and I think it applies there too. Now, for the first part about is this team set up to win, the 4 recruiting classes in a row of leading the Pac-12, I think that's true. And there's only a couple spots where you have to say, okay, if this group can maybe play, if we can get good production from here, then Oregon is saying, then yes, we could be that elite team. And I think most notably it's quarterback. And ultimately that will probably decide if this team goes from being a 8 or a 9 win team or going to that double digit mark where they're winning 10 games in the regular season, and maybe at the end of November, they're in somewhat of a discussion for the college football playoff. I think at cornerback, that also factors in. We know that Oregon has some talent at a couple guys, but the depth behind them isn't established yet. But on paper, I'm with you. The question, Prehm, that on paper, this team is positioned to win. Like any team, they've got questions. And for them, it boils down to kind of just what can you get offensively at quarterback, and can it be good enough to be a 10-win or more team? And then defensively, you've got a couple spots, cornerback, maybe a pass rusher. If those spots develop, then yeah, everything else is kind of situated where you could be really, really good. But that's why you play the games, because you just don't know the answers yet.
This is, like you guys have both mentioned, a very loaded question. I'm not really sure where to even begin with answering these series of questions, this one long ranging questions. I guess I'll begin with the fact that Mario Cristobal did not leave the cupboard bare for Dan Lanning or whoever else was going to be the head coach, whether it was Dan or Just Wilcox or I don't know, any random person who took over the head coaching job, me or you guys. The cupboards were not there. There was a lot of talent there from, multiple Pac-12 recruiting classes of the year, multiple 5-star recruits, a whole bunch of 4-stars, a whole bunch of 3-stars who turned into good players like Jamal Hill or Brandon Dorlus, something like that. So for Dan and company, this is a great opportunity to implement your guys into the program, to use the old guys who are used to playing in the Pac-12, who are used to playing for the brand that is Oregon, and for Pac-12 championships and, impressive early games against Georgia or Auburn or whoever the case may be. There's a lot of youth. There's a lot of experience on this team. So to answer that half of the question, like, is this like a team that's, after all these years, I guess, it's set up to win? Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of talent everywhere on the field. This is a team that I've seen. This is like the Twitterverse, but I've seen like anything more than 2 losses is unacceptable, which I find to be absolutely ridiculous. I think 3 losses is probably where Oregon ends up because we talked about that on last podcast. But, part of those 3 losses might be because of the Dan Lanning experience at head coach. And this was something that, Oregon's head coaching, I agree with both of you that Mario Cristobal had his moments of strength and weakness. I'll put it like that. We could all point to specific examples, but I'll just keep it pretty broad across the board here when I'm talking about this question. And I don't necessarily think that those situations are going to change with Dan Lanning. I don't know where the situations are going to be bad. I don't know where the situations are going to be good. Maybe he's an excellent game manager, but is really bad in another department. We don't know. I mean, it sounds like from just, practices or the second scrimmage, he might be a bad game manager because of that one mess up with the field goal, but we don't know. This is why you get, like Matt said, this is why you play the game. And, to temper expectations on what Dan Lanning will do is always good. I understand the sky high expectations from a lot of people because, Dan seems like a really good up and comer. And this is like, in baseball terminology, this is like getting a dude who's like a top 10 prospect in the league. And then he finally gets his big league debut and you expect the world from him. You expect him to hit 300, hit a home run and like his first couple at bats, get the crowd going, get the team energized. And sometimes that works. Sometimes you get somebody who's a stud just immediately, just boom, pedal to the floor no matter what. And then other times it takes a couple months. It takes until next year until they figure out their swing or they figure out, what their approach is at the plate. We just don't know what Dan Lanning is going to be yet. And I do think that coaching has a huge thing to do with how good a team is. And like Matt was saying, quarterback play also dictates a lot because quarterbacks are the most important position in football by far. They're up there in terms of sports, the most important position. So it's all going to seem to come down to like a bunch of things, but really it's going to come down to like 3 or 4 on how Oregon does this season. The talent's there. The pedigree is there in terms of where these guys have coached and where they have excelled at and who they've produced through their programs. But we got to see it at this program. This is the first year for everybody here at Oregon, and they have quite the doozy of a non-conference schedule this season. And I don't think that's going to stop during their time here. I think it's going to be, tough from the very get-go, and they're going to have to hit the ground running in order to be deemed, quote unquote, successful by people who watch the program.
And I guess if we want to carry your baseball metaphor, we can even make that a little bit more close to the Oregon program and just think about 5-star football talent and just the ranging outcomes of that. Of Kayvon Thibodeau arrives here, all the expectations in the world, and he doesn't start until Gus Cumberlander gets hurt, and then obviously has a fantastic freshman season, but it took a little bit of time. And then you have a Penei Sewell who came in and was starting at left tackle from day one and was awesome. And, I'm sure there were some growing pains. Obviously, he gets hurt for his freshman year, so that metaphor kind of loses its luster a little bit. But I think it is totally fair to guard that. I just think people think he's going to be perfect right away, and I think that's dangerous a little bit. I think, as we've established, and I don't want to talk too much about it, there's sometimes it takes players and coaches a little bit more time to get going, and I think ultimately Dan Lanning is going to be an awesome coach, just like I thought Chip Kelly was ultimately an awesome coach. But even Kelly, who's undoubtedly the most successful 4-year run, probably would say the greatest coach in Oregon history if you wanted to just use a small sample size. Even he started off with a really, really tough beginning.
It's just setting yourself up for disappointment. That's not really like there. You could miss an exciting and fun 9-3 year. But if you have this expectation that for some reason Oregon and Dan Lanning are going to be perfect outside of the Georgia game, and you think 11-1 is the expectation and that everything is going to go perfectly fine, you're going to miss a more than successful and entertaining 9-3 season that maybe ends with a bowl win and you get to 10 wins.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think we've seen last couple of years it happen, especially last year's year where I know it was frustrating because of how good it was at its highs, but I think even during those highs, I think we shared in that too of being frustrated even when they were winning games. So something to monitor, something to kind of keep an eye on. We'll see how things play out. Maybe Dan will be just incredible right away, and all of this is going to sound silly in 6 weeks. I have no idea.
Maybe, but we don't know.
Yeah. All right. Second one from @Crisley12345. I don't think that's a social security number. I think those are just the numbers in order to start. Okay. Over under.
The hot take, Eric.
The hot take. I think I cracked cracked his Twitter handle. Over under. The past few seasons with Mario as coach, the offense hasn't been able to score more than about 35 points per game. Does this Oregon team average more or less than that this year? I did a little bit of research here just to kind of prepare for this. 35 points per game is actually kind of an interesting mark. It's basically, if you score over that, you're top 20 in scoring offense, basically over the course of the last 5 years. You go back further than that, and it's a little bit more team scoring just because offenses and the spread offense, like Oregon was averaging like 48 points a game, like back in like 2012. But like for the most part, over the course of the last 5, it feels like 35 is about 17th to 23rd in terms of scoring. Those type of teams get over that number. Or the Pac-12 has 2 or 3 teams maybe per year reach 35 points per game. So I like that as a barometer to set this with, because you're basically saying, will Oregon be one of the, in the top 20% or so in the country in offense, and top 15 to 20, top 20% basically in the Pac-12 in offense. And I think that's kind of an interesting discussion point, just to kind of think about. There are plenty of reasons for why this offense can absolutely score more points than last year's offense, which, by the way, I mean, we want to talk about how last year's offense wasn't very good. And I'd agree, like there were some clear weaknesses there. It's still an offense that averaged 31 points per game. Right. So they weren't that far off 35 even a year ago, and a year which I think everyone would admit was pretty underwhelming at times, and especially certain games. And in fact, I bet if you take away those 2 Utah just complete, self-vomits out of the equation, the turd sandwich games, if you will, then they're probably over 35 the rest of the season. That's 17 points in 2 games there. I mean, if you take that away, it's probably close to 35. So can they get to 35? Sure, absolutely. I don't have any doubt that they can do it. But as we just established before, and Matt touched on, it is a new offensive coordinator kind of doing it on his own for the first time. It's a new head coach running the show. Obviously, Dan's going to be giving Kenny, I think, I think Kenny's got to have basically full agency, full autonomy to run his offense the way he wants to. But Dan will have some impact there. Those are both new guys kind of running those parts of the team. And then you have a ton of newness, as we talked about, the rest of the team. I mean, outside of offensive line, the quarterback's new, the running backs are new, the wide receivers are guys who maybe been around a little bit, but never in these roles. The tight ends, I guess, have a little more experience, but it's only sophomores, basically, So there's a lot of reasons to think that this offense can jump over 35. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility. But I'm also like, don't be surprised if it's pretty comparable to last year's offense, which I know is going to make people think, well, they should be better than last year's offense. And I don't disagree, but there is so much newness here. And I frankly just haven't seen enough to guarantee it. But I think it's pretty likely they get closer to, I think they'll score more points than last year probably, but I don't want to say that they're going to score 38 points per game or something, be a top 10 scoring offense. I think that's kind of ludicrous to jump in and say. And part of this will happen, and part of this also comes down to the fact that they played Georgia and they played BYU in non-conference play. Those are games where it's maybe going to be hard to get close to that 35 point per game mark, or 35 points, which could hurt your overall average.
I was just going to say, there's 5 games in my eyes where it wouldn't surprise me if Oregon scores below 35 points this season in that particular game. Georgia, BYU, Washington State, California, and Utah. And I almost throw in Oregon State into that mix as well, because it's a rivalry game. End of the year, you can get some funky weather with the fog or what have you. And then the Beavers are going to be better this coming season than they have been. But 35 is a lot. I think we're all spoiled still, even when we're over 10 years removed now almost from Chip Kelly being the head coach at Oregon. And think how much different college football is today than it was when Chip Kelly was the head coach and Oregon was averaging over 40 points a game. I mean, that's just crazy. I also don't see a lot of games where Oregon's going to be in that 50 or that high 40 mark from a scoring perspective. So if we're playing this game, I'm going to go Price is Right strategy, and I'm going to say they are going to average 34.9 points or fewer, but they will not hit 35. And if they hit 35, look, that goes back to what I was talking about the first question. That if they hit 35, it means that their offense is clicking and things are going well, and we could be seeing a really special season, because I think when you pair it with that defense, that's when you win a lot of football games. When your offense can average that and your defense can be pretty stout, like we all expect it to be. So I think temper your expectations a little bit. Go in maybe hoping or expecting, a little worse of a product. And so when it does perform a little above those expectations, you're pleased, you're happy, you're excited. And don't go in thinking that this is going to be the 2014 Oregon Duck football team with Marcus Mariota and all the weapons he had, or a Chip Kelly team, because Mario Cristobal is gone and Kenny Dillingham's talked about how they're going to air it out. They're going to take all these deep shots and, they want more tempo. Like, don't have this expectation that it's going to be a Maserati up and down the field. Enjoy it. Don't put these unfair expectations on this offense just quite yet. And like I think Jared has said, it could be very good, but it also might not be very good. We don't know. And so temper your expectations. And I almost think temper your expectations after 3 weeks, because Erik, you brought up the point, like Georgia is one hell of a way to start a season, but then BYU could be your signature game almost every other year too.
Yeah.
It's a tough non-con, like I was saying earlier. I'm going to answer the question. I'm going to say over. I actually really like what this offense could be. I agree with Matt to kind of temper expectations, because I think Oregon fans kind of get lost in that. The idea that this year could be the Chip Kelly year, and that was kind of the same way when Oregon brought Joe Moorhead in. I'm going to go over. I usually would go under on a thing like this. I'm going to go over because the other day I watched the entire Oregon versus Washington game from last season. Boy, was that abysmal. Yeah, I don't know. Don't ask why I did. I just did. I needed some football in my life. It was late Saturday night, so 2 days ago. It was after watching like Vanderbilt and Hawaii, and I wanted like real football. Not real football was played there either. Oregon's offense last year, except for the Alamo game, which, if you want to read between the lines and what I'm saying, do it. It was a terrible offense. It really was. There's no reason why Oregon was close in that game with Washington. But I know the conditions were pretty bad. But you look at a game against Cal, you look at a game against Fresno State. You look at Stanford. There were a lot of opportunities where Oregon had had the talent level, had the exposure, had the ability to be a much better offense than what it actually was last year, and they never did it, and they never showcased what they could do. And I think just the storyline that Oregon was hiding plays against Ohio State for Fresno State, that was already a massive red flag in my mind. And to me, I just feel like this offense has way more potential than last year's deal. I think Anthony Brown was a fine quarterback, but certainly had his moments of making mistakes, things like that. He was doing well in the NFL preseason, so I'll give him the nod there. But I think this offense with Bo Nix at the helm, who's already worked with Kenny Dillingham, who they already have a connection there. I understand both of those guys are new to Oregon, but they're not new to each other. They are not new in terms of having a relationship and understanding how the other person thinks. Bo Nix's best statistical season was probably 2019, if you want to look at all the numbers and add them up from a rushing and passing yard perspective. That was his freshman year with Kenny Dillingham. I know Kenny Dillingham hasn't been the offensive coordinator, the play caller for actually the ones calling the games, because he's worked with an offensive coach, but he's learned from two really good ones along the way. So I think the talent level, wide receiver and tight end, is pretty damn good. I think running backs are really good as well. There's a lot of guys there that they can use. And I think 35 points per game is very reachable. I think the only problem I could see is, again, this first game against Georgia where Oregon could score like 3. And it could be like a 10-3 game, like how Clemson and Georgia was to begin the season last year. I think, well, we'll get into predictions later this week, but, that's like, in my eyes, I feel like that's the best way for Oregon to win this game, is to make it really ugly and make it just a defensive stalemate. Just make it 10-3. And BYU is another good defense. Washington will still be good. Utah, blah, blah, blah. I just think the fact that Oregon's offense, as strugglesome as it was last season and not so much fun to watch, was still at that 32 point per game threshold, the 31 point per game threshold. I think just a few more few more things here and there in the offensive play calling can get them up to 35 points a game. And it's going to be tough. I get that, a top 20 offense, but I think the talent level on this roster is a top 20 offense. As long as guys who were high four stars last season coming in as true freshmen, as long as they continue to live up to expectations and continue to do well like we've been seeing. But I don't know, maybe I'm too optimistic about how this offense will run next year.
Two things before we go to break. The Cal Stanford stuff, I thought more about those games, the offense. I just think we have to acknowledge that the play caller was in the hospital for those. And I think that those were really terrible outcomes. And we just absolutely obliterated Brown and the offense against Stanford. And obviously that was a really devastating loss, just the way it went down in general. I just wonder if Joe Moorhead doesn't end up in a hospital with a very serious, potentially life-threatening situation, I just kind of wonder how those games go and how that maybe changes the season as a whole. But again, that's in the past. So I don't want to look at that too much. And then the other thing I was just looking at here, I was trying to see what I know it's hard to do this because Dillingham, what exactly was his role as offensive coordinator? Because it sounds like it was a Chip Kelly, Mark Helfrich kind of relationship where Chip Kelly is the offensive-minded head coach. Mark Helfrich is the guy who's quote unquote your offensive coordinator, but he's not calling plays. If you look at what Florida State did the last 2 years with Dillingham as the offensive coordinator, 27 points last year, and then 25 points the year before, and then at Auburn in 2019, where he was the same role to Gus Malzahn, 33 points per game. That was third for the SEC, by the way, which is pretty notable because that's an extremely difficult conference. So basically what I'm saying is the pedigree is hard to parse through here, even with Dillingham, because we don't know exactly how to value that information based upon role. But only really the 19 season, which I'm going to say if you score 33 points in the SEC, that's 40 points in the Pac-12. So I'm going to say that counts. But I think the last 2 years, not super impressive. But again, I don't really know how to translate I feel like
Florida State team was bad.
It's the equivalent of being this guy averaged 19 points per game in high school, and now he's going to go play at college, and you expect him to average whatever. It doesn't really translate. I don't really know how to do it. So I just wanted to give that some context in terms of what his offense have done recently.
I don't like looking back at Florida State stuff, and maybe this is selective memory, just because that program is disgusting. It's not when we think of Florida State, it's not what any three of us think of.
Sure.
When you hear that name, it's bad. It's really bad. But
no, anyway. You're not wrong. I just wanted to give some.
Sure, 100%. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion, and it'll lead to some defensive discussion as well as more Oregon football getting ready for the 2022 football season. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. A couple questions in, a couple more to go here on the mailbag. Thanks again, everyone, for sending in your questions each and every week. We really appreciate it.
Guys, I'm going to flip the order here. We're going to do a different order, but we kind of scratched a question last second. I think it makes more sense to do it this way. So I'm going to ask the question from @JakeDerman next. Who do you guys believe has a better season, Dontae Manning or Trikweze Bridges? #Autzen Audibles. It's funny because if you would have asked me this a week ago, and this speaks to how little we're actually seeing in practice, I would have said, oh, those are two guys that are kind of strange to compare to each other. They don't play the same position. Turns out they do. Turns out Trikweze Bridges, who was at safety all spring, is playing corner now. And so I think it's really interesting because I think what the question is getting at is basically who's your number 2 corner? I think we've already established Christian Gonzalez is your number 1, and I think potentially a very good number 1 corner. But the Manning Bridges competition, I think, is really hard to parse through because a year ago, Bridges was kind of seen more favorably to Manning. There's a reason Bridges started games to begin last season over Manning at corner. There's a reason that at the back end of the season, when there was some ins and outs in the lineup, that Bridges got a little bit more run than Manning. But then in the spring is the part that really throws me for a loop because we were actually watching practice. Both these guys were the ones the whole spring until Manning got dinged up at the end. And I thought Manning looked awesome in the spring from what we saw. And it's a bummer we didn't see him in the spring game to see how he'd compete in those kind of reps. And I thought Bridges was really great at the back end, which is why I was thinking these guys could probably play different roles and on the same defense. So I think it's really challenging to kind of assess these two guys' roles this year, I'm going to lean Bridges just based purely upon last year in terms of that was how that year went down. But I'm also kind of like, new staff, Manning has a ton of natural gifts. People forget sometimes, former 5-star recruit, highest rated defensive back Oregon has ever signed and had enrolled. So it's hard to bet against that pedigree. But I also think Trikweze, in terms of on-field stuff, at least last year, was the better player. And obviously Manning didn't play in 2020. So it's a hard one, but I'll lean Bridges over Manning, but it's really close for me. And I really don't feel great one way or the other. I think it's tough.
I think you're splitting hairs here. But if we have to split hairs, I'm with you, Erik. I'm going with Bridges. I think he's the more accomplished player between the two. And that's not a slight at Dontae. I mean, Dontae Manning got hurt in 2020 with that hamstring injury, which really prevented him from doing anything all season long. I think, not to go off a tangent, I think this should show us just how special of a player Noah Sewell is, because while Sewell hasn't had to deal with an injury, basically his entire time at Oregon is much like Manning's, and it's been impacted by COVID. I mean, 2022, they really couldn't prepare for the season, which hurt Dontae Manning. And then he gets hurt at the beginning of the year and misses most of the year and doesn't have a good offseason because of local restrictions in town that prevent him from working out with the team. And so Manning is entering really his first offseason, or his first year in 2022, which will be his third year on campus, where it's normal. And he's having to learn a new defense on top of that. So, like, I have a little bit of leeway here with the lack of, I guess, air quotes, lack of production from Dontae Manning. Just understanding what he's had to get through to play, football at Oregon, injuries and COVID and coaching change and all of that. I think he's going to have a big year for Oregon in 2022, but I think Bridges is a guy that Oregon's previous staff hit on. I think he's got position versatility that can give you a lot of options. And I think he will be Oregon's other cornerback unless Manning rips the starting job away from him, which will only make the room better if that's the case.
Yeah.
I've been on the Dontae Manning hype train this entire offseason. I'm not stepping down. I still believe that he's going to be very good this season for the Ducks.
Yeah.
I apologize for the noise going on. Like someone's moving above me or cleaning. I don't know what's going on. Just a lot of loud noises. But I do really like Dontae Manning and what he can bring to the table. However, it does kind of concern me that they had to change Trikweze Bridges' position from safety to cornerback during fall camp, even though he was the number one boundary safety during spring when we were able to watch. Granted, there were a couple other safeties that were hurt during the time, so that's something to consider. This is a tough one. This was the same thing that happened last season. It was the cornerback 2 or 3 who's going to start, who's going to be the first guy off the pine between Manning and Bridges. And Bridges won last season, and it's hard to think that he probably won't win this season. But I'm sticking with Dontae Manning in this instance. I think with this new coaching staff, without a clear 2 guys ahead of him in Michael Wright and TJ James, I think he's going to seize the opportunity here in his third season. I think he's a better athlete than Trikweze Bridges, and that's saying a lot because Bridges is a hell of an athlete in his own right. I just think at one point this stuff is going to click. I think he was highly rated for a reason. I think he's probably one of the better athletes on the team. I'm just going out on a limb and having whimsical confidence that this year he's going to click and he's going to be a good cornerback alongside Christian Gonzalez. And I think Trikweze Bridges will be the third guy on the team. But I think it's an okay situation either way. I think Manning and Bridges are both very good. I think that this is okay for Oregon's defense, not depending on who's starting. I think it'll be fine. I think Gonzalez is the lockdown guy. Again, we haven't seen him actually in pass coverage or anything like that. But from everything we've heard, it sounds like Christian Gonzalez is one of the best players on the team, which is always a good thing to hear. But again, I think it'll be fine either way. But I'm sticking aboard the Dontae Manning hype train Don't plan on jumping off until something just lets up 17 touchdowns in 3 games or something like that. I don't know, but go Dontae.
Gotta love whimsical confidence. It's one of my favorites.
That's all I got. I don't know. I don't have any backup from practice or anything like that to watch, so I'm just saying, good. Dontae's it. He's the guy.
And I think just a quick tangent or a quick little couple thoughts before we get to the final question for the show. When we talked about corner in the spring, it was Gonzalez, Manning, everyone else. And now I feel like if we're looking at tiers, it's kind of shifted to Gonzalez, Manning, Bridges as a second tier. And now you've got all these young guys who we have just not seen. Like, we've seen very little, by the way, of Gonzalez on campus doing things besides the spring game. And then what we've heard, we've seen next to nothing of that bottom group. Dickerson played a little last year. Kind of, I think the jury's still out on what we make of him. I'd heard some good things in the spring, but we'll see how things play out. I think it's a little bit alarming that none of them, according to Coach Martin, have come in and just taken over that number 4 spot. I mean, it seems like you'd like to have seen that already. Maybe that's also not turning over, not sharing your hand and maybe dangling the carrot again for a full week of camp, because he said that middle last week. But between, Dickerson, Darren Barkins, who returns, and then the 3 true freshmen, Jaleel Tucker, Jaleel Florence, and Kamari Terrell, 1 or 2 of those guys you probably need to be field ready by the middle of the year. I think if you have 3 healthy guys in Gonzalez, Manning, and Bridges, whatever order, Bridges and Manning are in, you're pretty set for a while, but it doesn't take a lot for you to have to rely on one of these young guys who really are really unproven, even though I would say Manning and Bridges at corner are fairly unproven as well. So it's an interesting spot for that secondary. And again, it remains, I think, the position I'm probably lack the most confidence in on the team, even though I'm really high on what Gonzalez is going to be for Oregon this year. All right, last question from @Ross_Makalich. I know he's done this. He's asked questions before, but Ross, I can't pronounce your name. Someone lay it out for me, Ross, in the comments.
Is it a soft C? Is it like Macelik?
Macelich? Which C? There's 2 C's in here. Anyway, we'll figure it out. Ross, we're discussing it on the podcast. So if you put your question out there and you watch the show, hopefully you're going to be able to listen to me asking for you to kind of spell out how you want me to pronounce this, because I apologize for this. Is like asking Matt or I to pronounce Polynesian names. Doesn't go great. All right. Anyway, long interlude from Ross. Are you expecting a fake punt, onside kick, etc., to steal a possession or 2 from Georgia in week 1? Preferably if the Ducks are not up 11. # Autzen Audibles. That's, of course, that's a good question.
Ooh. Did you get the joke?
I do. Yeah, Nebraska. Scott Frost shouldn't be doing it, but he did, and not good for the former Oregon offensive coordinator. That's really, by the way, this is before we even get to the question. I'm kind of stunned how just god awful things in Nebraska have gone for Scott Frost. Like, I always held him in fairly high esteem here, and then he was 12-0 at UCF, and I was like, oh, he's going to do pretty well at Nebraska, his alma mater. He's going to be the golden boy down there, and it's just been a complete shit show, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. I'm at this point, I'm kind of questioning if he makes it through the whole season this year.
No chance. He should have.
I checked our Nebraska site after that loss was over, and they basically already fired him as a fan base.
They fired him.
Not even telling him to come home.
Last year, they fired him 2 years ago as a fan base. He's been just terrible there. It's just what he is. He's at 20 or now 21 1-score losses in his tenure at Nebraska.
5-21.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what it's going to take for that guy to not have a job there, but it's gonna happen this season. It should have happened against. I mean, they lost to Northwestern, the Fighting Journalists. Come on, what are we doing? You're Nebraska.
They should have never. They should have never fired Bo Pelini. Go look at that guy's record. It's the most. He was
actually good for 2 years. He had 9 wins.
He was the Jim Mora. He was the Jim Mora of Big Ten coaches, where it was just we're going to win 7 to 9 games every year. We're never going to lose. We're never going to have a losing record, but we're also never going to win 10 games, which is not what Nebraska or UCLA for that matter wanted. But anyway, nobody.
I think this is just another example that if you're a coach and you leave Oregon, your success rate is not very high. If you openly choose to leave Oregon, your success rate at that next stop is not very high. Willie Taggart, Mark Helfrich, or Helfrich didn't choose. Willie Taggart. We've got Chip Kelly in the NFL. Scott Frost now. It took a while, but it's coming to an end here.
Yeah, I think for Frost, it's like maybe just don't leave UCF. But I
agree, 100%.
Impossible because he went to Nebraska, and that like would be
How are you going to say no to your alma mater?
Well, ask Mario.
How would you say no? Yeah, exactly.
Ask Mario that question. Yeah, he had the same answer. So anyway, we'll get to this question eventually, Ross. Apologize, but no, I think it's just kind of bizarre to see that go down. But it's a question that I think because we saw a couple people ask this about like, did you expect Oregon to run trick plays? So I'll kind of include that in the fake punt, onside kick thing of just kind of the general idea of doing something kind of abnormal because of the opponent. I wouldn't be surprised if they do something kind of crazy here and there because, I mean, again, I don't want to overstate the difference in talent between Georgia and Oregon because Oregon has a really good roster, but Georgia just won a national championship. I also know Georgia's lost a bunch of guys. So I see this on our message board of like, I saw some sort of, again, I'm going to do a side here before, but this is just something that bugged me. I saw something on social media a couple of days ago that was like trying to be like which team has the advantage at each position group, and it gave like Oregon and Georgia like the same, like Oregon had 3, there was a couple pushes and Georgia had 3 or something. And it's just ludicrous like maybe that's an exercise we can do, and maybe that's a fun exercise to do in general, but like I was
that one hurt to read. I know what you're talking
about. But my point is like I do think for Oregon to win this game, things are going to have to break their way. Yeah. Whether that be Georgia makes a bunch of mistakes, turns it over, doesn't maximize its red zone opportunities, misses field goals. I think if this game is played in a situation where both teams are kind of like firing on all cylinders on both sides of the football, I don't expect Oregon to win this game. And so I think if you're Oregon, you hope to force some turnovers. You hope to have a couple of lucky bounces. I don't even say lucky, but have a couple of things bounce your way. And then, like I think I think if you're up 11, maybe you don't kick an onside kick or fake punt. But I think if you're in a situation where you think there's a competitive advantage to be had in the game by being a little bit more aggressive and pushing the envelope a little bit more, I think it's worthwhile to consider. And I'll be curious to see, like, Kenny Dillingham is known for being a pretty creative play call. Not play call, but a pretty creative mind in terms of, we've heard, players talk about that kind of thing, or the offense has a lot of fun nuances. And he's talked about wanting to be kind of a, challenge himself with some, I think he even said challenge himself with some difficult play calls in one of the scrimmages. Like, I kind of wonder what they've got hanging out over there in the HDC in terms of some ideas that maybe you could throw some sort of flea flickers and double reverse passes and stuff like that. Just kind of what is in the arsenal. And I wonder if we'll see that maybe early on against Georgia to try to set a tone.
I think it's all about just doing it in a smart manner. I don't think it's, like you said, you're up 11 mid fourth quarter or early fourth quarter and onside kicking it, giving all the momentum back. Like, that's stupid.
Right.
But maybe it's not even a trick play, but necessarily all of a sudden in the late third quarter, you go tempo really fast. And that's some trickery thrown in, getting away from who you are and taking advantage of a situation. Or maybe it's like a fake field goal where it's, hey, we know we're inside the 20-yard line, and if this doesn't work well, like, they still have to go the length of the football field. So we're going to throw a fake punt or a fake field goal at them. Something of that nature. I don't know. I don't expect crazy trick plays, and maybe if you call like reverses a trick play, I could see that happening more than I could see an onside kick or a fake punt or some kind of pass out of a field goal set or something like that. I could see Oregon going for 2. Maybe it's a situation where it comes up where it's, hey, if we can get this 2-point conversion, it puts us up by more than 2 scores, or it cuts the 2-score lead to 1 score. Let's take the risk here to do that. Like, that's what I could see, but I don't see flea flickers. I don't see onside kicks happening from Oregon. that Dan feels like Dan doesn't feel like a real big risk taker, but that's just a total guess on my part.
Yeah, I know it is. I have no idea. They might come out and have like 3 running back passes to start the game. We'll be like,
Right.
all right, Sean Dollars is the quarterback.
Yeah. To answer Ross's question, am I expecting it? Sure. Why not? Like I said earlier, I don't know. Like maybe I haven't seen them throw more than 30 yards just quarterback to quarterback in 6 months. But the like I was saying earlier, this needs to be a rock fight for Oregon to win. This needs to be like 17-10, 10-3, 13-10. It needs to be just a defensive masterclass from Lanning and Kirby Smart, and Oregon needs to have a couple of things bounce their way, like Erik was saying. It doesn't have to be lucky bounces, but a ball on the ground, if for Oregon to really capitalize, it's got to bounce towards one of their defenders and not one of Georgia's offensive players. And maybe that comes with a trick play. Maybe that comes with an onside kick to come out of halftime or something like that. I hate fake field goals and fake punts, so I pray to God Oregon doesn't do that because that is just a nightmare in general. I feel like those never go correctly, and when they do, it makes the rounds, but they're 90%. They're just a turnover waiting to happen. And again, like I don't know if they're going to do a trick play or something like that or not. I would assume that Kenny Dillingham has it up his sleeve. I think we saw a wide receiver pass in the spring game, if I remember correctly. So he's got it up there. Every offensive coordinator does, but will they be that level of trickery against Georgia, who, I don't know, if things just go a little bit wrong, that defense is going to be very scary and capable of intercepting like Troy Franklin's throw to Dante Thornton. I think it's going to be very specific where they pick their shots. I think if it's going to be at any point, I could see them taking shots with like a wide receiver pass or something like that, like on first down, and just completely confuse the defense how they should. But I don't think they're going to get desperate to do it. I think they're going to try to attack and do it. I just think if they get down, they're going to go to what their bread and butter is. And I don't know what their bread and butter is because we haven't seen it. But, like last year it was with Mario, it was just we're going to run the ball right up the middle and going to say, you guys try and stop us. For whatever Oregon's bread and butter is this season, if Oregon gets down to Georgia early, I don't think a trick play is coming. I think their opportunity to do so has already stopped. I think it'll happen early to try to get a lead and try to get some momentum because they're going to need it in Atlanta.
Okay, I have one last thing, and it's a trivia question. It's a trivia question that I stumbled upon yesterday pretty organically. Do you know who the Hatfield in the Hatfield-Dallin complex, whose last name that is?
Yes.
No.
Who's that?
It is Penny Knight's mom.
It's Phil Knight's mom.
Phil Knight's mom.
I just was a little surprised because I thought that was a Tinker Hatfield thing. But no, the Hatfield-Dallin complex, this is just a random trivia question, is named after Phil's mom, Lotta Hatfield, and Penny's mom, Dorothy Dallin. So there you go. We
talked about that on the car ride up to Portland yesterday in my family car as we were taking a drive north.
I was talking with my parents on the back deck eating a slice of pizza. I just thought it's weird how apparently.
Where'd you go for pizza? That's the question.
We had some Pegasus pizza brought over after watching a Formula One race. It was a good time.
Yeah.
But no, I was expecting that to be related somehow to Tinker, and turns out it's some mom love. So I thought that was a little surprising, but interesting. I don't know. I'm curious to see how many Oregon fans listening knew that, and how many assumed it was Tinker related. And then the thing I was trying to figure out, which I'd love to see if anybody knows, is there some sort of familial relationship there with Tinker and Phil there with the mom's maiden name being Hatfield? Could they be like distant cousins or nephew something? I don't know. Is there something there? Just kind of had dawned on me. I thought it was interesting because Hatfield's not a super common last name.
Mm-hmm. Well, Philip or Tinker, if you're listening, please reach out. We'd love to know.
Let us know.
All right, it's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. Thank you for submitting your questions. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.